Neville, when you look at the airlines and the supporting services for air travel, how ready do you believe their corporate cultures are or were, 2017 to 2019, to support significant change?
Well, I think that they were making so much money. The highest level of money that has ever been made was in the year 2017, and it was around $38 billion. And then in 2018, they made 30 billion, and in 2019, they made another 30 billion. When a business or industry, I should say, is making that much money, there's not a heck of a lot of incentive to change, because you would say, why would I change? Of course, I have my business model, which is pretty good. Now, I'm happy to make some incremental changes to even improve it so we can make a little bit more money or improve the service a little bit better. But there's not incentive to make major transformational changes. So a couple of examples that airlines were going through in that those 2 or 3 years is that they were saying maybe our prices should be dynamic and our bundling should be dynamic, that we create a bundle for an individual person or price it for an individual person and change it. So that kind of stuff was, partly to make even more money. And then as far as using technology is concerned to improve the service, is that maybe we can give you ways that you can self-service yourself. As an example, if the flight is late or canceled and you're at the airport, you don't need to call the call center. You can go on your mobile phone and you can look at the options that are available and make the booking yourself. So those are 2 examples. One is, what could we do on an incremental basis to make even more money? And then the second one is how we could use some technology, emerging technology, to help customer service in the sense of making the customer, being able to do things themselves when things go wrong.
You've got a population of people who, in a lot of cases, I believe, are long tenured employees inside the airlines, 10, 20 years. This is kind of their full and only career. Can you talk a little bit about, frontline worker to executives, who's really ready today to make significant changes that are necessary to get it back on track?
Yeah. Well, let me start with the why we need to have major transformational changes right now. The reason is that this particular coronavirus-led disruption is broader and deeper than any of the last 10 disruptions we've had in the last 50 years, starting with the oil crisis, 9/11, SARS, financial crisis, and all. Yes, they were all disruptions, but absolutely nothing compared to what it is today. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of what I mean by that. The industry is expected to lose $118 billion this year in 2020. And moreover, they're expected to continue to lose. Next year's losses are projected at $38 billion. That is more money than that was lost after 9/11. That was more money than lost in 2008 after the financial crisis. So the point is that this is a long-term thing, and they're going to have to make major transformational changes to get out of this. But to make these transformational changes, you cannot do it with conventional thinking. It has to be non-conventional thinking. And it's non-conventional thinking that is creating the problem, because the corporate culture has to change completely, not only to allow the C-suite executives to think differently, but also to encourage good ideas coming from the rank and file as to what we should be doing. And the big problem that I've seen is happening is that up until now, there has been no integration among 3 types of strategies. There's the business strategy. What do we need to do? There's the technology strategy. What kind of technologies we can employ to do that business strategy? But then there's the employee strategy. And to the best of my knowledge, that's the one, either it didn't exist at all, or if it existed at some airlines, it was not integrated into either the business strategy or the technology strategy. The corporate culture just didn't do it. That's the basic line.
I think you've seen in other industries, especially if you look on LinkedIn for popular job titles and what seems to be trending, you'll see that a lot of organizations are investing in having someone head up digital transformation.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about a significantly tenured industry like the airlines, where you've got a lot of executives who this is kind of the first. They were in this industry as their first job, and they've moved their way up the rank and file, and they're holding a lot of that tribal knowledge. For the types of disruptions that you're talking about, who's going to lead those, and how should the airline think about their employment strategy and recruitment strategy to find something that works and sticks?
Well, a couple of things. Number one is that it is true a number of the larger airlines did bring in the past few years executives with the titles such as Chief Digital Officer. They did bring those kind of people. And you know what? Most of them were just internal executives that they took, whether it was somebody from marketing or operations or finance, and made them the Chief Digital Officer. Well, that really is not going to work. So there were a couple of airlines that I'm familiar with and have worked with. They brought in Chief Digital Officers from non-airline businesses, such as the technology companies. And what happened was that when these people came in, they were not accepted by the existing C-suite. They were looked at as outsiders. You're here, you don't understand the business. The airline business is very different than than a Google or an Amazon or Facebook or whatever. And it's just not going to work. You just don't plain understand our industry. It is so different. You're used to making things like, how can I improve the website? Well, this is a lot more than that. So that was one problem, is that they never understood that. Second is that there was very little understanding among all the C-suite people. What is this digital transformation? What can it do? How can it be achieved? So there was not much understanding in that part of it. The next problem was that even when the Chief Digital Officer said that, all right, we need to do this technology here, they were evaluating that technology based on standard conventional rate of return on investment business cases. That doesn't work. Next is that these digital officers were beginning to find out, especially the ones that came from outside of the industry, that this is the most siloed industry that they had ever known. That marketing has its own set of data, operations has its own set of data, and even within commercial side, marketing, sales, customer service, loyalty program, they all have different data. And then on the operations side, flight ops, ground ops, maintenance and repair, everyone is working with different data. There is no sharing of the data. And so that is the most siloed industry. So that was the next problem. And the last problem that they had was that there was very limited access to the information available to the people that are really serving the customers. They just didn't have the data that was available, partly because it's sitting in different silos, and partly they couldn't even get to the silo that we need to do it. So let me give a very basic example. Your flight has been canceled, and you say, well, put me on the next flight. And, there you are, Christopher Allen, put me on the next flight. The next flight only has one seat available. There are 10 people that need that seat. Who is the gate agent going to give it to? That gate agent has to make a decision in less than a minute. How is that person going to get all the information on the 10 people and say, based on your status, based on your ticket, based on whatever, you get the seat, and Nawal Taneja does not? See, this is what I mean. The people that are serving the customers, they need data in real time and at every touch point in the journey. There is no such thing as that data being available. So these people are very frustrated. And that's the problem that we're facing, is that so the chief digital officers, they were able to achieve things, but very little. What they were able to do are things like, all right, let's use certain technologies to make a small improvement in customer relations or in operations or maintenance or something, but nothing that went all the way across the enterprise.
Kind of, in your view, not just getting us through COVID times and the current pandemic and the constraints of today, but going maybe farther into the future, what do you think the big disruptions will look like for the airlines, and what sort of things should they be investing now in order to be early to market with some of those innovations?
Having spent decades in this industry, I'll tell you, most of the industry has still been planning based on their hard assets. Hard assets are airplanes, union contracts, airport facilities. These are hard assets. So they've been trying to maximize the value or the return from their hard assets. Well, what's going forward is going to be required is to integrate not only the value from hard assets, but the value from soft assets. Soft assets are things like your brand, your loyalty program, the slots that you have available at the airport. These are, assets which needs to be utilized. And this is where technology comes in. Networks, for example, is another soft asset. Now, when I say networks, I don't mean necessarily just the social networks, how you sell the products across the social networks, but also networks within the travel chain, networks between the supply chain and apps. So I think what's going to happen forward is that planning is going to be done maximizing the value that you have of your hard assets as well as your soft assets. And to do that, you need a different group of thinking, a new type of a thinking that goes on.
So when we're talking about the types of services that they provide, there's a emotional component to it, there's a mental component to it, there's a physical component to it, and all of that influences the performances that employees deliver. Nawal, in your assessment of the airline industry, who's really having success at kind of squaring up and thinking about the employee experience as the key to their overall success, and where might we have seen it in the broader marketplace?
Well, I think that relative to the attention that has been focused on customer service and customer experience, we have not done anywhere close to that on the employee side. And, a few years ago, there was a book written by Roger Connors and Tom Smith, and they kind of laid it out in a pyramid that I thought was very good. And what they basically said is that the pyramid is made out of 4 layers. At the very bottom is the experience that the employee has. So based on that experience, an employee will form his or her beliefs. And that's the second layer above the pyramid. And then after you have formed a belief, the next thing you're going to do is to take some action based on that belief. And then finally, the results that happen are results based on the actions that you've taken. Well, if you want the employees to produce certain actions based on their work or based on the strategy or based on what they've done, well, then you got to go to the bottom of the pyramid and change their experience. So that's what I'm getting at, is that, we need to pay much more attention to employee experience. And in some ways, I would say that it's even more important than customer experience. Why? Because it's the employee experience that is going to produce the customer experience, the desired customer experience.
Tom Smith's work, from Partners in Leadership and on changing culture, I think is super fascinating, and it's something I believe in. That the base of all of your actions, happens to be from your experiences. And if you get enough experiences, whether it's in something that you've always done or in something new, that the new stuff is going to help you form new beliefs or kind of accelerate that.
Yeah.
When we look at the lifespan or the career span of someone inside the airline industry, it tends to be long. 20, 30, 40 years. How do you expect that to help or hurt the industry as it goes forward?
Well, I think it's going to be changing quite a bit as we move forward. And the reason it's going to be changing is not because the airline leadership at the top thinks that we ought to change it. They're going to be forced into it by the new generations that are coming in. The older generations, they took an employment and they stayed with that company. It doesn't have to be just airlines, any company. They stayed with them for a very long time. Well, the newer generations, call it the X generation, whatever you want to call it, they don't want to stay that long with a company. They want to move. It could be from, between 3 and 5 years. Now, why is it that they want to move? Because they're looking for more out of work, more out of life than they are just work. Now, it's not just that I want to move around so I can get the highest amount of money or wages or salary. It could be the financial rewards that are over and above the direct ones. It could be the empowerment. It could be that am I given the freedom to do what I need to do to show what I can do. So I think that the lifestyles of the newer generations are very different. They are, for example, very much into the environment, as an example. What are we doing to the environment? So the airlines are going to be forced into trying to work with the newer generations. So this idea of a 20-year service, I think is going to be history very soon.
That's interesting. So if we're talking about designing for the long view, the employee experience that we'd really like to have to be successful with the changes that you see that are inevitably upcoming, where would you start investing in the client or in the employee experience to be successful for these sorts of future changes?
Well, you need to go outside of the industry to bring in experts to study what is the experience that they're getting right now and what is the experience that need to be getting. And that experience, could be based on the knowledge that they have or the knowledge that they don't have or the skills that they need to have or how to use the technology. Now, let me give you an example. Airline pricing is done in buckets. There are, like a couple of dozen buckets. So when you buy a ticket for $300 and they say a seat is not available in that bucket, the next one above that is $375. A seat is available in that. So what the airlines did, they have a couple of dozen buckets on every flight, couple of dozen. And I don't mean first class versus business class. No. Within the economy class, there are a couple of dozen buckets. Now, what they have done is that they have done what they call dynamic pricing. And what they do is if a particular fare is selling very fast, they'll close that bucket. And if it's not selling very fast, they'll open the bucket or keep it open for a longer time. So that's what they've done. Now they're saying what we're going to do is we're going to do dynamic pricing within a bucket. So let's say this bucket has 30 seats available and they're all at $300. Now they're going to say, well, wait a minute, why can't we change it to $325 or $275? So they're telling their salespeople to go ahead and do that. And the salespeople said, we'll do it. Fine. But the salespeople are not skilled to do that. And here's why. In order to see if I should be changing my price from $300 to $275 or $325, you have to have two basic pieces of information. Number one is, what is your competitor's bucket? Is it open or closed at that time? And number two is, what's the price elasticity of demand? If I change it to $325, how many people would be willing to pay that? That information is just not available. So if you expect the employee to be able to do this, you're going to have to somehow develop their knowledge to be able to do that. It's very easy to say, well, you can find out what competitors are doing. How? How am I going to find out if one airline's bucket is open or not? Yes, you could have spider webs that could go out and pretend that they are customers and try to book in, but the competitors know that. They could also fool you into doing that. And these are very complicated things
Mm.
in order to, give the right experience and the right tools. They're going to have to be, and I don't want to use the term training, because training tends to be in a, very much blue collar, rank and file type of a thing. I think it's more of the development that they have to be developed into that.
Let's talk a little bit about the changes in client or buyer habits with the airlines going forward. Certainly, there's a lot of uncertainty today, and business travel has been maybe one of the biggest sources of revenue for the airlines. When you're looking forward, kind of post-pandemic, can you talk a little bit about how booking travel, or long periods of time in the future, what am I going to do for air travel, next Thanksgiving, so almost a year from now, versus something more along the sides of demand-driven supply, where it's more short-term thinking that's fueling how the airlines are opening up seats and flights and routes.
Yeah. Two things. Number one, and it kind of ties back to a question you asked earlier about the people who have worked in a certain function for 20 years, so forth. Well, two things. Number one, some of the historical data that we have used to forecast future, that data is useless. That data does not have any validity anymore. So some person says, I've worked with 20 years with this kind of data. I know the inside and outside of it. Great, but that data is not applicable anymore. Two is forecasting techniques. How do we forecast? Well, those forecasting techniques are now outdated too. They don't work. For example, we used to keep some seats open for very high fares for the last minute business travelers they want to book the night before or 2 days before the flight, and they'll pay a very high price for it. Now, airlines had very advanced mathematical techniques to forecast how many people would be booking at the last, the day or 2 days before, hour by hour. Well, now it's completely the opposite. In other words, there are people who are going to be canceling at the last minute, not booking, canceling seats that they have. So to say that here's an executive who has done this thing for 20 years, or a manager who has done this for 20 years, so therefore he or she is the right person to do it, not true, not necessarily. So you need to have new sources of data, new sources, new techniques for forecasting. And some of those are actually with the younger generations who have knowledge from other industries. Like there could very well be a person who worked for Amazon, who has a lot of experience in dynamic pricing. So an airline might want to bring that person in. So those are the type of things that I'm looking at. Now, let me give you another example. Some of the data that we have had in the past is not applicable, but that doesn't mean everything is lost. There is now new source of data, and that new source of data is my mobile phone. The location and movement of the phone. A person getting on an airplane from Chicago O'Hare could very easily be living near Midway Airport, and you can tell that from the mobile phone. So you could very easily get hold of that person and say, did you know that we have a flight out of Midway Airport, which is only 2 miles from where you live? That tells you an example of the use of mobile data. Another example is that if you see that mobile phone or mobile device moving at 50 miles an hour and goes for 200 miles, what do you conclude? Your conclusion is that the person is driving a car for 200 miles. Well, why not take a plane? Well, if the reason is that maybe the flights are not available that I want, there's only 2 flights a day out of that. Maybe they're very expensive. So that data could be used to say, look at all those people that are driving 200 miles that we could be attracting to our airport. Where I'm getting at is that there are new sources of data that are available. Unfortunately, the older generation, they don't have understanding of that. The newer generations do. All right. If that mobile device is moving at 400 miles an hour, obviously you're in an airplane. If it's moving at 50 miles an hour, you're in a car. If it's moving at 100 miles an hour, you're in a train, but not in the US, in Europe. if he's moving at 4 miles an hour, either you're on a bicycle in Amsterdam or you're walking real fast. You see what I'm getting at? There are new sources of data that can be used to see what the supply and demand should be.
Yep.
There are other sources of data, credit card, expenditures. Where are you spending the money? So, I've always given the example, which is that this goes back 15 years ago, is that if a person buys the cheapest ticket on an airline, the airline's conclusion is twofold. Either a person is very poor or a person is very cheapskate. In other words, he got the money but doesn't want to spend it. Okay, that's a conclusion based on the fact that you see the purchase of a ticket very cheap. Well, let's go look at the credit card. The credit card shows that he bought a Rolex watch for $8,000, buys suits, Armani suits at $4,000 a piece. So obviously a person is not poor, a person is not cheapskate, but why only the cheapest airline tickets? Because you don't show value. The person doesn't see value in that. See what I'm going at? So there are things that, now, don't get me wrong, some of that data is subject to privacy. So we have to be very careful that we don't, take out the privacy issue. But within that privacy, there's all kinds of information that is available that we can use. And to use that information, that data is the new type of employees, is the younger generation. They know these things inside out, how to get that information and still protect the privacy of the person.
And for an airline offering a new service in the future, where would I see benefit or value as a customer if the airline had that from me?
Well, you have to convince them that to buy a higher price ticket simply because we will give you the information that you're looking for or the value that you're looking for. For example, one of the things that customers are interested in is that when things go wrong, what are you going to do for me? All right. Now, here's a couple of examples. If the flight is canceled and if the airline says, all right, we'll put you on the next flight, but the next flight is not until tomorrow morning. But what if your competitor had a flight? Why don't you put me on the competitor and say, oh, no, but their fare is, $50 more than you paid? Well, that's the customer service you're providing me. So if an airline was to say, we'll get you to destination within 4 hours, so when you were supposed to be, never mind which airline we have to buy your ticket on and what price it is. As far as you're concerned, you will be at your destination within X number of hours to be determined later. That's just one example of what I'm talking about.
And that data could be used to inform other services, of course, that I'm using. So we often do conferences and stuff out on the West Coast or in Las Vegas. And some of the best options here from the Midwest to get out there, we end up leaving awfully early, but then we arrive awfully early, which means the hotel room isn't open.
Exactly.
And this is a potential data stream that's monetizable both for the airlines as well as the hotels to integrate those two things together.
Oh, yeah, because there are people that are checking out very early in the morning because they're taking out flights or whatever. So the question is, how do we find out which rooms are going to be vacated very early in the morning and which customers coming in need that room? And if the answer is, yeah, but the room can't be cleaned until 2 o'clock in the afternoon, why not? And he said, well, it's going to cost extra money to get the cleaning staff there at 7 in the morning. How much extra? The answer is $30 extra. All right. Then ask me, will I be willing to pay $30 extra to get that room clean? And the answer is sure, yes. Well, what if the question was not $30, but $50? Would you pay $50 more? My answer is yes. But what happened if the room cleaning was $30 and you're asking me for $50? Where is that $20 going? $5 for the app that looks at it and say, Chrissy is checking out at 5:30 in the morning because she booked a limo to go to the airport. $5 to say Neville is arriving on that flight at that hour, and $10 for the organization that puts it all together. There's a lot of money to be made, but while you're making money, you're also improving the service provided to the customer at one end, and at the other end, the occupancy at the hotel. So what we got to do is we got to integrate, and the employees that are able to do that, they're not the older types. They're the new generation of employees who are equipped with the data, information, access to it, platforms on which this information can be gotten, and the ability to be able to make the decision real fast.
Fantastic. Well, I really appreciate your insights today. I think this is a valuable addition to the journey back, and looking forward to more of your insights as we gather together to have a roundtable discussion on what sort of things that we can do to help overall travel and hospitality return back to significant success here in 2021.